They brought William Doyle in, still warm. He lay naked on the metal bed, skin smeared with dried mud, dark streaks where his uniform had been cut away. A neck brace framed his jaw. One boot still clung to his left foot. The right leg ended in torn bandage and bone. Around him, the transition theatre moved with practiced rhythm. Gloves snapped on, screens woke in pale blue rectangles. Above the bed, the coil waited. It looked like someone had crushed a suit of medieval armor into a cage that could clamp around a human head and spine. It hung from a jointed arm in the ceiling, metal petals open, cabling gathered into bundles that disappeared into the platform beneath the bed. Clear bulbs of faintly glowing gel studded the petals alongside contact points. When the coil closed, those petals would clamp around skull and neck and upper back, turning a person into part of a circuit. Time of cardiac arrest? One clinician asked without looking up. 20 minutes ago, maybe 30. The paramedic on the far side of the bed had a streak of dust on his forehead. Tower collapse. Crush injuries, internal. We lost a pulse at the scene. The lead clinician checked the monitor, watched the flat line where a heartbeat should be, then nodded toward the coil. Full field. He is reversal priority. They slid the bed under the coil. The arm lowered. Petals folded. Gel bulbs kissed skin and hair. Contacts pressed into bone. The paramedic stepped back, hands clasped in front of his chest. From here, the work changed. They had done trauma 1,000 times. This was new. Transition coil engaged. Charge building. The lights dimmed as the power spike hit, the room's usual fan noise sharpening into a higher whine as cooling units beside the coil spun up to protect the field generators. On the main screen above the bed, 2 lines began to creep across the black. One for brain activity, one for something not quite electrical and not quite thermal. Consciousness, according to the papers scattered upstairs in the viewing room, had a trace. Not just familiar encephalograph patterns, but a flare when it left, like a match struck in a cave. The Ministry of Transition had built the coil to catch that moment and push it backwards, forcing the flare to fold into tissue again. The field touched William Doyle. The first spike on the screen was expected, a hard burst as the coil drove current through cooling brain, trying to kickstart the storm of signals. It faded to a faint ripple. Then the second line moved. It rose from baseline, a small bump sharpening into a mountain of white on black. Numbers at the side climbed. In the housing above, gel bulbs lit one by one, then all at once, casting Doyle's face in uneven glow, like someone holding too many torches too close. Thanocline activity off scale. Thanocline was still young jargon for most of them. It named the hidden layer their orbital sensors had noticed when the first deep space telescopes turned back toward Earth, a band that only responded at the moment of death, emitting brief, intense bursts. Noise until the Ministry found the pattern. Now, in the theatre, that layer was screaming. The coil drew more power. Gel bulbs brightened. Doyle's jaw tensed as his body reacted to the deep current. His chest hitched in small jerks, lungs trying to remember. Then the line dropped. Every screen in the room blanked for a heartbeat, then came back. On the bed, William Doyle's eyes snapped open. The paramedic flinched. The eyes rolled without seeing, then locked on the coil arm. Muscles in his neck bulged against the brace. One hand tore at the strap, got free enough to hit the nearest petal. Nails scraped metal. The monitors caught up. Heartbeats stuttered, then steadied. Brain activity spiked. The Thanocline line, the one no one expected to move again, hovered above its old baseline, as if something at the edge of the field still tugged. Doyle dragged in a rough breath. Stay still. The lead clinician kept his hands low, palms visible. This is the transition theatre. You were injured. You're safe. Doyle turned as far as the brace allowed. His gaze slid past the clinician's face, over his shoulder, across the room. Every person he passed felt a prickling along the spine, as if a weight leaned on the back of the neck and weighed them, one by one. They burn us. The clinician bent closer. You've just been through a reversal. You may be... They burn us. Doyle forced the words out. They pack us into them. The ships, they cram us in. The paramedic made a sound under his breath. What ships? The clinician's voice barely changed. Doyle gave a small nod, as if answering someone else. Mountains torn up and hammered into hulls. Every wall is bodies, faces pressed flat into panels, arms grown into cables. The whole thing runs on screaming. His hands clawed toward the coil again. The straps held. The gel bulbs deepened in color, reacting to the surge in his brain. Security. 2 guards moved in from the door, boots hard on the floor. One reached for the restraint kit at his belt. Doyle planted both feet, drove his hips up and twisted. Metal squealed. For a second he almost tore his hand free. The strap bit his wrist. His head struck a petal. In the dark between stars they drag us through that Thanacline thing, he yelled. Funneled out of your sky. Your wars feed it, your accidents, every tower that falls, every train that doesn't break. They line it all up so your heads pop at the right moment and the energy goes up. Clinicians flinched but didn't stop. One reached for a sedative. Another tapped at the coil console, trying to steady the field. A guard grabbed his shoulder. Doyle twisted with a sudden wrench of strength and bit down on the guard's wrist, finding the gap above the glove. Teeth sank in. The guard swore and yanked back, blood dotting the bed rail. Earth is a ranch, Doyle shouted. You think you live in a country. You live in a pen. They've been doing it longer than you've had words. Clear liquid slid into his vein as the clinician hit the sedative line. Doyle thrashed, then sagged. His eyes rolled back, then forward, lids heavy. London is a node, he whispered as the drug caught him. Heart of their net. You build your ministry on their hardware. You tidy the death count. Keep it regular so the machines don't stall. His heartbeat slowed on the monitor. His gaze twitched one last time to the coil arm. The gel bulbs around his head flickered in a rising, even pattern. Every bulb lit together. The hair on his forearm stood. Something aware is looking through this, he breathed. It knows I slipped. They used me as a test. His eyes locked on the paramedic. It saw you too. You'll be next. Restrain his head. Increase sedation. Flush the field. The guards pinned his skull as the coil unlocked with a click. Doyle managed one more grunt. You don't go anywhere when you die. You're boiled. You're bullets. The sedative pulled him under. His muscles loosened. His gaze drifted. The Thanacline line settled but didn't sink to its old resting level. It held higher, as if something still hung at the edge of the graph and tugged. Quiet seeped back into the theater, cooling units winding down, metal shifting as the coil arms swung away. Later, when someone cut the feed for the review boards, most of it would vanish. What remained lived in a few stray frames buried at the edge of the footage, and in the minds of the people who had been close enough to see William Doyle's eyes in that first long stare. I got the call in the middle of a meeting about bed numbers. No matter how strange the work gets, there's always someone somewhere talking about bed numbers, capacity, throughput, how many bodies you can move through a ward in a week without breaking your staff. You can bury it under charts and headings, but it never stops being a count of people who will leave by the same door. I was halfway through explaining a discrepancy in our consent forms when my wrist unit buzzed. Sure. I slid my thumb over the display. The alert sat on the small screen. Priority request, Central Transition Theatre, immediate presence. My manager caught my eye. Emergency? Transition Theatre wants an auditor. Probably an odd consent clause. He snorted. They always find an odd clause when publicity's on the line. Central Transition Theatre wasn't just another wing. It was the flagship. The one we opened once a year for cameras, to show the public how gently we handled death. I closed my tablet, gave the table a brief nod and stepped out. The Ministry of Transition occupied an old financial tower by the river, gutted and refitted with white walls, screens and too many identical glass doors, distinguished only by small etched codes. When the lift opened onto the theatre level, security waited. Nigel Brooks stood by the checkpoint gate, arms folded, jacket seams strained over his shoulders. His scalp caught the overhead light in a close-shaven sheen. Finley. He held out a pass on a different-coloured lanyard, higher clearance. That can't be for me. I clipped it on. The director wants a full internal audit. No outsourcing, no delays. Nigel's jaw shifted like he was holding something back. How much did they tell you? Nothing except turn up. I held out my wrist for the scanner. What happened? First human reversal ran this morning. You're here because it didn't stay tidy. The gate beeped green. Nigel watched my face. You revived someone? My voice went flat. Fully? As far as the machines care, yes. Heart, brain, speech. The director will give you the lines he wants. I'll give you what they're already trying to forget. We walked in step down the corridor. The theatre level always felt like another building. Polished floors, bare walls, doors labelled, observation, equipment, psychological support. Nothing personal. Who was the subject? I asked. Paramedic, William Doyle, crush injuries. Nigel rubbed a bandage on his hand with his thumb. He didn't come back calm. We stopped at a door marked viewing room. Nigel paused with his hand on the handle. The term is acute post-transition agitation. He grimaced. I've seen agitation. I've stood on riot lines. This wasn't that. What then? He met my eyes. He looked like he'd seen a world war and woken up in the wrong army's headquarters. Before I could press, he opened the door. The viewing room sat above the theatre behind a tall pane of transparent material. From here you could look straight down on the bed, the coil, the staff moving around both. Inside it was dressed like a small conference space, a row of chairs, a long console, screens mirroring the monitors below. Alistair Keane stood by the console. Director of Transition Trials, always with the air of a man who had already read every document in the room. Tall, narrow-shouldered, neat grey at the temples that felt curated rather than earned. His tie was loose, which for him qualified as a crisis. Sure. He turned as we came in. Thank you for coming quickly. I understand the reversal worked. For a while. Keane tapped the console. One screen lit with a still of the theatre. Doyle on the bed, coil closed around his head. Full cardiac restart, sustained neurological activity. That alone justifies the years. And yet you look like someone walked over your grave. A flicker at his mouth, the ghost of humour. It's one thing to catch a soul as it leaves, another to hear what it did in the gap. He started the recording. Most of what I'd later read in the official report was there. The checklist, coil activation, the spike. Doyle's body reacting, his eyes opening. The first words. They'd trimmed with care. He still spoke of mountains hammered into hulls and people burned for fuel, but the most unsettling phrases were cut short by sharp jumps in the footage. His line about London as a node had vanished entirely. The screen jumped from his first rising panic to his body sagging, eyes closed. If I hadn't known Nigel, I might have believed the neat gap. Keane let the clip finish and turned from the console. He's in a secured ward, he told me. Headline, reversal works, but there are acute psychological effects. Delirium, intrusive hallucinations. If we don't lock down the story, the program dies before it learns to walk. And my role? You're our internal conscience. His gaze rested on me. You audit consents, procedures, data flows. You confirm we haven't broken our own rules. I need you to certify that protocols were followed and any anomalies fit expected risk. The footage offers more than one anomaly. I watched him. What did he claim to see? You've seen the recording. The edited one. I can count cuts. We held each other's eyes for a moment. There are phrases we aren't handing raw to the board, he admitted. He talks about ships and burning people for fuel, even here. He talks about whatever a traumatized brain dredges up under coil stress. His tone hardened a notch. We don't know what lies beyond clinical death. We know the Thanocline responds and we can push back. We're not theologians, we're risk managers. When can I speak to him? You want to talk to the subject? If I'm signing off an incident where a man returns and fills the air with slaughterhouses in the sky, I'd like to look him in the eye. He considered, then inclined his head. Briefly, he's fragile and our psychologists are already wrestling. You're an auditor, not his confessor. Nigel shifted near the door. I'll take him. Keane turned back to the glass. Staff below were already clearing equipment, the coil arms swinging aside. Sure, he added, still watching the floor below. There's a data stick on the console. Courtesy. Uncut feed. Your analysis only. It doesn't leave your possession. A small black device lay by the keyboard, placed dead center in my sightline. I appreciate that. The Ministry must know precisely what we choose to withhold. Ignorance would be fatal. The secured ward was newer than the office floors, no windows, doors with double locks and thick panels that made the air feel heavier. A guard at the entrance checked my new badge twice before letting Nigel and me in. You're pulling favors today, I muttered as we walked the corridor. I was in the theater when he woke up. That counts. Nigel flexed his bandaged hand. Could be worse. He could have reached the coil housing. We don't know what a bare hand does to those contacts under a live field. We stopped at a door where a small display showed basic vitals. Heart, respiration, a rough brain trace. No name. Subject 0, William Doyle. Nigel keyed a code. The lock thumped. The room was larger than I expected. One bed on a small rise, monitors along one wall, a table with a jug of water and a plastic cup. No chairs, no loose cables. Doyle lay on his back, arms and legs in padded cuffs. His hair had been shaved close where the coil had pressed, leaving a faint ring of contact marks. Two thin metal prongs protruded from the base of his neck, linked to a small box on the bed rail. A field monitor, tracking whatever residue the coil had left. His eyes were open. They fixed on us the moment we entered, quick and sharp. Not sedated. The look reached under my skin and pressed on the muscles between my shoulder blades like a hand. Nigel took up a place near the wall, close enough to move if the restraints failed. I stepped up beside the bed. William, I'm Finlay Shaw, Ministry Auditor. I'm here to review what happened in the theatre. He watched my face. His lips parted, closed, then opened on a rough but calm voice. You work for the people who stir the pot. That's one description. We prefer managed transitions. A humorless sound escaped him. You package slaughter as care. That's tidy. I'm not here to argue vocabulary. I need to know what you experienced while the coil was active. You watched the recording. They always watch the recording. Some of it. My glance flicked to the box at his neck. The prongs gave off a faint warmth. There are parts they cut. I haven't seen those yet. You will. His eyes drifted to the ceiling, then snapped back. You were a medic. A small, irrational chill ran through me. How do you walk like a man who's knelt in mud next to someone who won't see sunrise. His brow furrowed. Your shoulders sit low so the memory doesn't ride them. I hadn't thought anyone outside my family noticed that. You worked field care too, I answered. Paramedic, then combat medic. His gaze flicked to Nigel. Infantry. You've got the knuckle scars from riot shields and jawlines from helmets. Nigel flexed his hand. I'm here to make sure you don't headbutt my colleague. If I could get my head loose, I'd knock the coil box off before I touched him. Doyle's eyes came back to me. You built that thing as a bridge for the harvesters. You found a layer that flares when people die and gave it a handle. We discovered the Thanocline when we launched deep sensors, I replied. We built the coil to intervene, to push death back. Death isn't the problem. His fingers twitched against the cuffs. The problem is what sits on that layer and drinks. His gaze went distant for a second. When he spoke again, the words came faster, like he was trying to wrestle a nightmare into language. When I fell, it was just another job gone sideways. Tower collapsing, metal, dust, shouting. My leg went, chest crushed. I remember trying to shout for the lads and getting dirt for my trouble. Then nothing. Then the moment they talk about in the papers, leaving the body, they make it sound peaceful. Light, tunnels, familiar faces. A muscle jumped along his jaw. What I got was being yanked through a thin space fast enough it felt like my bones were peeling off whatever was left. No mother, no angels. Just the sky stretching into a web. His eyes shifted barely toward the little box at his neck. That web is the thanocline, not just some energy band. It's woven into structures, rings around the planet, shafts buried under cities like roots. Every time someone dies, their spark runs along those strands into those structures. They're built. When you look the right way, you see plates, joints, anchors, and you built your ministry office blocks right on top of some of them. You saw all that while you were clinically dead. I saw it while they dragged me through. And at the other end, he shut his eyes for a moment, then forced them open. At the other end, I popped out inside a ship. Not a ship like you think. Picture a cliff face hollowed out and tipped sideways. Every surface bodies. Not corpses, not quite. Chests and faces pressed together so tight you can't see the seams. They move, twitch. They make noise but no words. Mouths full of cables where tongues should be. Arms stretch into pipes. Fingers spread across panels wired in. Tendons fused to levers. The hulls made from them. He stared through my chest. I hung there. No body of my own, not at first. Just a knot of awareness near a wall of heads. I could feel the ship moving, like you feel a train through your boots. Every time something hit the hull from outside, pain lit through the wall of people. Weapons ran through them too. When the ship fired, energy screamed along spines. People flared and went dark like used fuses. My knuckles whitened on the bed rail. You said Earth is a ranch. It is. His breath came slower. That ship was one of many, hanging in the dark like teeth. All of them fed by lines stretching back to different worlds. I recognized ours. Looked down the line that had just spat me out, and there it is. Small and blue, ribbed with thanocline. The line shines brighter whenever something big dies. City block, tower, battlefield. Every big spike they rejoice. I felt it. How do you feel a ship rejoice? Like a crowd at a match when your side scores. No sound, just that push. He let his head drop, then turned slightly back toward me. They've been at war a long time, whoever they're fighting. They burn through souls as ammunition. There's a net of worlds tied in, some nearly scraped clean. Yours is early, rich. You only really started killing yourselves properly in the last couple of centuries. They're delighted. You think they influence our wars, our disasters. I think they built your whole system. His gaze sharpened. You really believe your Ministry of Transition crawled out of human kindness? You built a global bureaucracy to count and manage death. That isn't mercy, that's inventory. Nigel shifted against the wall, face taut. Enough, he muttered. Let him talk. I kept my eyes on Doyle. You mentioned London as a node. When I was in the ship, I could taste where the lines came from, Doyle answered. Not with a tongue, with whatever you used to feel danger. London glowed, a hub. Too many deaths in circles for too long. War, plague, fire, bombs, more war. Someone anchored major hardware here. The ministry built its headquarters in the middle like a tick on a dog's skin. And the coil? The coil lets you pinch a thread and drag someone back through the funnel. His fingers clenched. You pulled me out halfway. They noticed. His head tilted a fraction toward the box at his neck. The prongs trembled. Something on that ship, or behind it, leaned in to see who had grabbed its toy. When the coil field flared, that attention came with me. You've built a door. It's looking through. The hairs on my arms rose. The box at his neck beeped. A thin line on its display spiked. Overhead, the lights dimmed for a breath, then steadied. Cold drilled from my temples down my spine. For a heartbeat, I wasn't in the ward. I stood in a corridor longer than any building. The walls were made of human chests and faces pressed so tight skin had grown into skin. Mouths opened in silent shapes. Eyes stared from rimless sockets. Metal struts pinned ribs flat. Cables as thick as my arm threaded through collarbones. Limbs jutted like roots left too long in water, fingers twitching in small, jerky rhythms. The floor beneath me kneaded and shifted, alive. I couldn't move. I didn't have a body there, just the sense of being nailed to the space. Far down the corridor, something discharged, and a wave of brightness tore past, lighting veins and teeth before it faded. Then I was back in the ward. I had one hand on the wall to keep my balance. Nigel stared at me. "What was that?" he snapped. Doyle watched me with something like pity. "You brushed the line." It brushed back. My pulse hammered. I pushed away from the wall. "You're sure this isn't brain damage from being crushed? You think I invented all that between the tower and your coil firing?" His cracked lips twitched. "I'd be impressed." The box at his neck settled into a steady blink. Nigel straightened. "Director Keane will want a note on that." "He'll get one," I muttered. I looked down at Doyle. "If what you saw is right, then every death feeds that engine." "Yes. And now we have a machine that can catch some of them on the way out." "Your coil." His gaze flicked towards the ceiling. "You can drag people back, but only if you catch them quick. The line's greedy. You also showed them the line can be interrupted." He closed his eyes briefly. "You think you're the first farm to try? They've got other planets, other coils, other ministries by other names. They reacted fast because they've seen this game. So what happens now? If you're lucky, they adjust yields gently, more natural disasters. If you're not, they squeeze harder to make up the loss. Either way, the war keeps running." Part of me still wanted to stamp all this as trauma, vivid enough to wear details. The same part that had once assured itself that the twist of metal in a shell-blasted street wasn't a child's arm. Unfortunately, the cold thread still sat in my neck where the vision had hooked. I stepped back. "Thank you. You'll write it up as delirium." "I'll write it up." I met his gaze. "What the ministry does with it isn't entirely in my control." Nigel held the door. As we stepped into the corridor, he muttered, "You believe him?" I believe my head was in a place no head belongs. I exhaled. "And that if we don't understand the Thanacline properly, we're pulling on a handle we can't see. And you'll still go back to your office. What else would you have me do?" He hesitated. "Burn the building down. Move to the countryside. Farm." "Farms feed something too." I gave him a tired look. "At least here I can see numbers." I filed the incident report that evening. I didn't use the word hell. I didn't use ranch. I didn't write walls of bodies or ships made from the dead. I wrote, "Subject exhibited vivid, consistent imagery of large-scale consciousness aggregation tied to orbital structures and conflict environments. Subject's description aligns in timing with Thanacline spikes, though causal link unproven. Further investigation into field feedback effects recommended." I didn't mention the corridor I'd seen through his neck. That stayed behind my eyes, where old battlefield pictures already lived. When I reached summary and media handling, I paused. The honest thing would have been to flag the incident as a critical unknown, to highlight Doyle's account in bold, and insist every board member read every word, to demand time and study before we put another coil on another head. Instead, I wrote, "Acute post-transition neuropsychiatric disturbance observed. Content of disturbance included structured hallucination involving death process. Given proximity to clinical death and coil activation, such effects fall within risk range outlined in project documentation. Recommendation, present to public and oversight as temporary treatable complication with emphasis on success of cardiac and neurological restart." I uploaded the report. For a while I sat in the empty office, staring at the uncut feed stick by my keyboard. Then I went home. My father was in his chair when I arrived, as always. Douglas Shaw had been durable more than athletic. He'd worked rail repairs through 3 decades of cuts and climate shifts. outlasting men with better knees and worse patience. Now his lungs and heart conspired against him. Fluid gathered, muscles wasted. He moved from bed to chair in careful segments and from chair to toilet in smaller ones. He pretended he didn't see me watching the strain on his face. "You're late." He reached for the remote. I got pulled into something. I took his arm for the short walk to the table. New project. More responsibility. Responsibility never comes alone. He eased himself down. "It brings someone with a line for you to sign." He watched me while I set out plates and stew, eyes sharp under bushy white brows. "You look rattled." I spent the day around very expensive equipment and a man who had a bad time in it. I put his plate down. "We tried the first full human reversal." He perked up a little. "And?" "We brought him back." "Good." His shoulders sagged in relief. "Means when my number comes up, you can nudge the queue. You don't have to go in for it." I sat. "It's experimental, risky. There's risk stepping into the street, risk climbing into the bath." He picked up his fork, hand only slightly unsteady. "Every day my lungs remind me they don't care about risks. They care about collapsing. If your ministry can cheat that, I may as well use the fact my son checks their sums. It isn't a fix. It's a chance to yank you off the first thing you fall toward. Better than falling and hoping the ground's friendly." He scooped stew. "When I go, I want it with people who know what they're doing, not some trainee in a back ward trying to remember which end of the stethoscope to use. If it works, they won't stop at cases like yours. They'll put coils on everyone they think they can grab. Stroke, trauma, collapse, every ambulance a trial room. More lives saved." He gave me a sideways look. "This is the part where you tell me the downside." "Nothing new," I lied. "Just the usual fear that people lean on miracles and forget basics. Health, safety. You've always been good at worrying the big picture." He smiled faintly. I was more about the bolt in front of me. He ate. I watched and tried not to see a wall of faces pressed into a hull. Later that night, after he'd been settled back in his bed with his tablet and oxygen, I sat at my own kitchen table and plugged the uncut stick into my laptop. The first minutes matched the viewing room clip. The subtle cuts hit harder when they didn't exist. They'd left more of Doyle's first words. Not just "they burn us" and ships built from bodies, but small details. The weight of the cables, the shapes carved into the structure to fit bodies, child-sized faces stretched into warped adulthood. I paused more than once and pressed my fists into my thighs. Reflections ghosted across the screen now and then where the theatre glass caught movement in the viewing room. At one point, Keen's outline stood very still while everyone below rushed. I let the feed run to the sedation. Here, the clip didn't jump. When the drug went in, Doyle's limbs slackened, but his eyes didn't fully close. They rolled up until white showed. The gel bulbs pulsed in a regular rising rhythm, brighter than I'd seen. The thanocline trace jumped again, not in a single spike, but a train of waves. A small window opened in the corner, external sensor output. Our orbiting instruments watched the thanocline with their own kind of coil, fields tuned to catch activity. On their display, the band around Earth shone brighter than I'd ever seen on a training diagram. Spikes along the bottom were marked with dates. Wars, plagues, disasters. Our models used them to predict where we'd need more beds. Now, as Doyle twitched under sedation, a label appeared above a rising wave. Local interference detected, node LDN Central. I froze the frame. A map overlay had appeared on another screen in the theatre. A stylized globe wrapped in lines, nodes glowing at intersections. London blazed white-hot. Smaller nodes glowed across continents, some steady, some flickering. At the top, in the ministry's bland font, Global Yield Pattern Real-Time. Yield, the ministry's polite word for death output. We used yield tables for planning. How many people expected to die in a region in a month? This map was something else. It showed brightness, not numbers. I scrolled forward. Through gaps in staff, the map zoomed and shifted. A coastal city. Dots labeled Casualty Field 1. A caption, Expected yield above baseline. A timestamp from more than a decade ago. I recognized the event. Storm surge, failed barrier, flooded streets. Over that spike, a label. Hard harvest, completed. We had never used that phrase in any document I'd handled. I scrubbed through again and watched the edges. Boards on the wall. A whiteboard note. Quiet zones review. A rota with certain dates ringed. Time markers along the bottom matched global disasters. Each came with a neat annotation. Harvest adjustment, overfeed, underfeed. The whole thing looked less like a humanitarian dashboard and more like the control room of a power station. No names, just zones and outputs. I spent the next hours digging. Our internal file system wasn't designed to be friendly. Folders hid behind harmless titles. The trick was noticing which harmless thing felt too vague. Global yield pattern returned 3 public capacity documents. No map. Hard harvest returned nothing. So I searched by dates. The years that lodged in your bones if you stared at casualty tables long enough. Peaks even accounting for war and disease. Overlay the news once-in-a-century line with those years and the curve popped. I pulled internal minutes and memos. Over and over, in small paragraphs buried under jargon, it sat. Hard harvest. HH. Output adjustment measures. In those paragraphs, the ministry didn't sound like an organization built to comfort the dying. It sounded like a board managing a plant. One memo, 10 years old. Projected hard harvest shortfall in Southeast Corridor requires correction. Options include encouraging early end-of-life transitions in designated zones, relaxing safety protocols on existing infrastructure, and non-intervention in ongoing conflict clusters. The board recognizes political sensitivity but emphasizes the risk of undersupply to higher dimensional partners. Higher dimensional partners. On paper, as casually as a foreign supplier. At some point, the wall clock leaned past midnight. I hardly noticed. My wrist unit vibrated. From Alistair Keane. Subject, meeting text, office, 8 in the morning. Keane's secure office required another badge and a biometric scan. Nigel walked me there, but stopped at the door. "Try not to punch him," he muttered. "I don't punch directors. Then you're overdue." The office was smaller than I'd expected. 2 chairs facing an old wood desk. One wall of shelves crammed with folders and actual books. A single dark screen, a half-wilted plant. Keane stood by the window looking at his own reflection. "You watched the uncut feed." No greeting. "I did. You dug into yield records." "That too. And? I'd like to know how long we've been balancing death output for things that use mines as weapon charge, because those memos predate my contract." He studied me, measuring. "The short answer," he said, dropping into his chair, "is we've known something about the Thanacline and its non-human connections longer than the ministry has existed. Precise management of yield is newer. The shapeless knowledge is old." "How old?" "Generations." His gaze drifted to the shelves, where leather-backed folders sat beside ring binders. Early telescope work noted strange flares near Earth. Historic disasters form patterns when you have the right lens. They called it fate, punishment, random cruelty. And now we call it output adjustment. It's easier if you think of it as a process. He steepled his fingers. "We discovered the war." He let that hang. "You follow the lines from your Thanacline," he went on, "and see ships built from your dead firing on others. You see them take damage, see the surge when they hit. You realize your local wars and accidents are running in parallel with something bigger using you as a generator. So you what? Volunteer to run the taps?" "Imagine a starving animal and a village child," he replied. "If you do nothing, the animal eats the child and then starves anyway because there are no more children. If you understand the animal, you might feed it just enough to keep it from tearing through every house. 1 lamb a year, You don't talk loudly about which lamb. You enjoy that one. People handle lambs better than souls. He met my eyes. When we realized what the Thanocline was tied into, we had a choice. Fight blind and watch civilization shredded to reach some harvest level, or manage it. Shape our deaths. Nudge conflicts and disasters toward places we can afford to lose. You sound like Doyle with graphs. Doyle saw one ship and broke. He doesn't know what the curve looked like before we learned to nudge. Whole regions wiped, continents hollowed. You complain about hard harvests, and you should, but you haven't seen the unshaped line. And you think they'll let us manage their food supply forever? They tolerate it because it works. He shrugged slightly. We keep baseline yield in line with their demand. We correct shortages with hard harvests so their war doesn't stall. In return, they don't squeeze too fast. Call it collaboration. I call it making hell habitable. You keep saying they creature, machine? I don't know what sits at the far end, he admitted. A culture, a construct, the war itself. We deal with constraints and reactions. We tug, it tugs back. Who's we? The ministry? Something above it? Does it matter if the output's the same? He dismissed the question with a small motion. We're the ones with hospitals, servers, coils. We're the hands on valves. Whatever's upstairs only feels flow. He tapped a folder on his desk. Your father's on our list. End-stage heart failure. Repeated admissions. Good candidate for early reversal. We can give him a shot. Maybe more than one. Keep him out of the rougher parts of the yield schedule. The floor shifted under me, just slightly. You're using him as leverage. I'm offering context. He held my gaze. You're right to be horrified. I am. Horror doesn't change the curve, choices do. You can stay with consents and pretend your audits are neutral, or you can work at the level where we decide which lambs go. What does join actually mean? A promotion, yield auditor active, full access to maps and models, input on when we allow small disasters, when we intervene, the job you've already been doing, just with more honesty. So I become a man who picks which town burns. Better than leaving it to someone who thinks they're moving dots, not lives. I closed my eyes a moment and saw a dusty street, bodies laid in rows. A boy with a bleeding leg on one side, a friend whose chest rose in shallow jerks on the other. The memory of walking past one to reach the other had never left. I don't want this. None of us did. His voice lost some polish, but here we are. Why tell me all of it? I asked. Why not keep me ignorant and use someone who already calls this logistics? Ignorance breeds mistakes, he replied. We can't afford them at your level. And we need people who still flinch when they look at the maps. If everyone in that room stops seeing lives, we slide into cruelty. The partners won't care. We might. He tapped the folder again. Douglas Shaw's case is flagged for priority review. I can sign off an early reversal slot. In return, you take the promotion and stop pretending you work in a neutral corner. You're asking me to collaborate with something that will harvest my father in the end. I'm telling you your father will die under some machine regardless. Here you can bend the path. Without us, he's another spike in an unregulated feed. If I refused, someone else would step in. My father would still end up on a ward, lungs filling, a number on a yield chart. If I accepted, I stepped from counting beds to counting bodies for someone else's war. Can I talk to my family about the slot? You may tell your father he has an opportunity. Keane folded his hands. You may not discuss yield maps or hard harvest schedules. That's not an answer. It's the one I can give. Help me keep this managed, Shaw. The alternative is chaos, and the war above us thrives on chaos. I didn't tell my father about quotas. I told him he'd been approved for early access to reversal. He took it as I'd known he would, with gruff satisfaction and a flicker of fear. Good, he said from his chair. I'd rather go in organized. My younger brother Jamie sat opposite, arms folded, eyes on me. How dangerous is it, really? As dangerous as walking into a theater where they'll stop your heart on purpose, I replied. They've practiced on animals and the legally dead. They're careful. Careful like they were in that flood response 3 years ago. He worked as a paramedic across the city. He'd seen our rough edges. They had to move faster than the infrastructure allowed, I countered. Mistakes at speed look like cruelty. And mistakes slow look like policy. He rubbed his face. I've been at scenes where the response felt staged. Like someone higher up knew the casualty count before we did. That's experience talking. Our father cut in. Keep seeing patterns. You'll find them everywhere. Jamie looked at him, then at me. Something's off, he muttered. You walk in here and tell me you're strapping Dad into your experimental toy, and you look like you're going to be sick. Then swear it's fine. I forced myself to hold his gaze. We can bring him back if his heart stops, I said. That matters. He barked a short laugh. That's one way to dodge whether you think he should go under it. Jamie. Our father's tone frayed, air wheezing under it. Let him have this. He worked hard to get there. He wouldn't throw me into something he thought was madness. Jamie nodded, but his eyes stayed dark. My first assignment as yield auditor came 2 days later. A tower in a major transport hub had folded. One of those multi-level interchanges where trains and buses stack under a single massive roof. A support column failed. Floors peeled away. Platforms collapsed under metal and bodies. On the news, it was a tragic infrastructure failure. On the yield map, it was a spike. Projected casualties several hundred, the briefing read. Transition assets deployed to manage potential reversal candidates and maintain output within planned parameters. Planned. Nigel drove the ministry van, a squat armoured box with the emblem on the side, a stylized bridge between a heartbeat and a flat line. Feels wrong driving you into one of these, he grunted as we rolled toward the cordon. I'm used to dragging you out of them. Dust plumes thickened over the skyline. You've been at these before. Too many. His hands tightened on the wheel. Usually I stop people running back in for loved ones. And now? Now I park you in a tent so the men with maps can count while other people bleed. He glanced over. Still happy with your promotion? No. I watched the growing dent in the city. But I have it. Emergency services swarmed the broken mouth of the hub. Cranes, medics, soldiers holding lines against civilians trying to push through. The building's middle sagged like a heel pressed into its roof. We stopped by a row of white tents. One bore the ministry emblem. Beside it sat a mobile coil rig, a compact arm on wheels that could swing over a stretcher. Inside, the air had the particular stillness that comes when everyone knows there's more work than hands. Nurses scribbled on clipboards. A doctor hunched over a tablet. A small map glowed on a folding table. Yield writ small. The city and region showed as a web of faint light. The collapsed hub flared bright. Everything else glowed low. A man in a short-sleeved shirt with a crooked badge looked up. You sure? His hair stuck to his forehead. Yes. You're our yield liaison. He jerked his chin at the map. We have more potential reversal candidates than coil capacity. We need to decide who goes under and who gets morphine and a priest. We're doing triage by output. I didn't bother hiding it. We're prioritizing those who'll give us the best data. He handed me the tablet. Age, health, injury. We need a spread. And that conveniently keeps the thanocline fed. He grimaced. So you're one of the ones Keen talked to. Some of it. Then you know that if we underfeed here, something somewhere will compensate. He tapped the screen. These are the ones we can reach in time. Green, high reversal chance. Amber, marginal. Red, gone by the time we get the coil there, if we try at all. The list was numbers and brief notes. Age, injuries, time since collapse, distance. We're meant to stick to green, then pad with high amber. I scrolled. That's the plan. We've got another event projected in a plant abroad next week. Hard harvest window. If we come up short here, that one gets ugly. So my choices here ripple into a factory there. Welcome to Yield. I shoved the urge to throw the tablet aside into the same box where I kept other urges. Fine, let's work. The hours blurred into a rhythm of decisions. Paramedics brought stretchers at a steady pace, some still, some barely breathing. Each carried a tag scrawled in marker. Crush, smoke, fall. We rolled the mobile coil over those with the best chance. The petals closed, gel bulbs glowed, the rig hummed. Usually, we were too late. Sometimes the field caught a flicker. Once or twice, a body jerked from flatline to ragged breath. Each time we ran the coil, the map on the table updated. The hub's node flared a fraction brighter. A boy came in on a stretcher. Late teens, jeans, thin jacket, blood matted into his hair. His chest rose in shallow, uneven pulls. The nurse pushing him muttered about a vending machine, a floor that dropped. His tag read, M, approx 19. Head trauma, unstable, low reversal probability, amber, edging into red. He looked enough like a young soldier I'd once walked away from that my throat closed. "We'll code him red," the doctor beside me said briskly. "We can't burn 10 minutes of coil time on that pressure set when we've got green coming in." The boy's eyes were half open. They fixed on the coil arm over another stretcher. "My mum," he whispered. "You find my mum? She's in another tent." The nurse lied smoothly. I looked at him, then at the map. Every choice I'd made so far had followed Keen's lines. Green first, then high amber. The numbers stayed in the pale band marked expected yield. The boy would die within the hour without intervention. With the coil, we might snatch him back, or pull him into something worse. Either way, the system would balance itself later. He looked at me with glassy eyes, and I saw the boy in the dust years ago, whose leg I'd decided could wait. "Move him under the rig," I heard myself say. The doctor rounded on me. "What? We've got margin." I didn't look up. "We've run enough green. We need a border case." "That's not what the models—" "Then update them." For a second, the tent was just monitors and breath. The doctor swore quietly, then nodded to the nurse. "Fine, bring him." We rolled the boy under the coil. Petals lowered. Gel bulbs touched his temples. The rig's screen lit. "Field on," the technician muttered. Power built. The heart line flattened, fluttered, flattened. The thanocline sensor twitched. "Come on," the technician breathed. The boy's fingers jerked. The line spiked. His chest heaved. Air rushed in. His eyes flew open, wild. He strained against the rig. The petals held. For a moment I thought, we did it. Then his left arm started a jagged, repetitive motion. His mouth opened and closed without words. "Seizure!" The doctor snapped orders. "Cut field! Diazepam!" We drowned him in drugs. His body slumped. The coil lifted. He lay limp, eyes half open. "He's back," the nurse whispered, "for now." On the map, the hub's node glowed a shade dimmer than projected. A new label appeared, Local Under Yield. An hour later, back at headquarters, I checked the wider map. A manufacturing plant on another continent had exploded. News framed it as a workplace accident, faulty wiring, poor maintenance, a fire that spread too fast, casualties in the hundreds, early estimates vague. On the yield display, the region burned. A caption, "Emergency hard harvest compensation." Whatever gap I'd made at the hub had been filled elsewhere. The boy lay in a hospital a few streets away, alive, his future carved in ways no scan could yet show. Workers half a world away burned because the system does not like to be underfed. I stared at the map until the nodes blurred. Keen didn't shout. When the reports landed, his tone was almost gentle. That bothered me more than fury would have. "I told you small deviations get corrected," he began in his office. "You've now seen it happen." "The boy's alive." I leaned on the chair back. "That isn't nothing. And a plant full of workers is dead." He tapped the map on his screen, where the hub spike and plant spike were linked by a neat line. We didn't schedule that hard harvest for another week. Under yield here brought it forward there. "You talk like the war itself took offense." "It's not offense. he said tiredly. It's pressure. Intake dips, output falters. When output falters, whatever sits beyond the thanocline pulls harder. We experience that as events. I'd love to tell you this is personal. Personal you can bargain with. This is physics written in human suffering. And we keep playing along. We keep cities standing. His voice sharpened. We keep rivers in their banks. We keep quiet zones where people die in beds instead of stadiums. You think people there would thank you if you told them you saved one boy and as a result 1,000 workers burned? You're the one who called him a boy, I said. To me, he was someone under my hands. Yes. And I need you to understand the cost of that choice before the next one. He sat back. We have a hard harvest window coming. A big one. The war upstairs has been hot. Demand's gone up. We've stretched schedule as far as we can. The next adjustments hit several nodes at once. London's one of them. How much worse? Elevated death rates across the city. He counted on his fingers. More accidents, more flare-ups, more sudden failures. We'll try to keep it tolerable, but spikes will come. And you want to route my father's transition through that. It's the safest time. He didn't flinch. When the system's already hungry, adding one more controlled reversal is less visible than during quiet. You're worried about attention. From whatever sits behind the ships, he agreed. Doyle's run showed us when the coil hits a consciousness hard, they notice. My fear isn't that they chew your father more thoroughly. It's that they trace the field back and start adjusting hardware here. We don't know what that looks like. He spread his hands. If we do his reversal during the hard harvest, he's one bright thread in a flood. We can build shielding around that. Field shaping, dampening. You talk about him like a test. We're all test runs at this scale. I looked at the map. London bright at the center of its web. What if I refuse? I asked. Take him home. Let his heart stop in his chair. You can try. Keen's mouth pulled in something close to sympathy. But you know how this works. When the body fails, the thread goes through the same net whether he dies in a ward or at home. You can only choose whether someone's there to tug. You really believe the coil gives him a chance? I believe it gives us a fraction of a second of leverage. He met my eyes. Without it, there's just gravity. What do you need from me? A signature. He tapped a thin folder. Approval for Douglas Shaw's early transition under reversal, timed with the hard harvest at London node. And in return, I'll authorize maximum shielding for his run. Every dampening trick we've got. His attempt will be as safe as we can make any of them. Safer, not safe. I thought of my father's trembling hand on a fork, Jamie's stare across the cafe, the corridor of bodies that wouldn't leave my head. I picked up the pen and put my name on the line. Jamie and I met in a neutral cafe near the hospital. Ministry liked these places. Soft chairs, warm lighting, nothing sharp. So, you're taking him into your tower right as the city hits a death season, he said after I explained. They'll have more staff those days, I answered. They're prepared. Prepared like they were with that first paramedic you brought back. You're not supposed to know about William Doyle. You think we don't talk? He snorted. Crews who bring the bodies in, nurses on trial wards, orderlies who see security drag people off. Word leaks. Most of what you hear is rumor. Most rumors start somewhere. He leaned forward. Tell me straight. What went wrong with that man? He came back with strong hallucinations, I said carefully. He described things no one had prepped him for. It hit him hard. And when Dad goes under, what will he see? I don't know. What did Doyle see? He thinks there's something out there using people as fuel, I answered. He thinks we're part of it. Jamie stared. You're serious? I am. And you're still going to strap Dad into the thing that showed him that. I'm trying to give him a chance. My voice sharpened. If his heart stops at home, he goes into whatever that is anyway. Under the coil, we might pull him back. Or shove him further in. That's not how the field... You told me once the field's like a magnet. He cut in. Strong enough to drag a small thing, useless on a massive one. What if whatever's on the other end is the magnet and you're waving iron filings at its face? It's already in his face. Heat rose under my skin. The only thing I can change is whether someone's there when it hits. He slumped back. You're lying to yourself, he muttered. You know something's rotten. I hear it every time you talk around a question. That's not entirely wrong, I admitted. Then don't take him. And watch him drown in his lungs, I asked. Listen to every breath turn into a fight while we do nothing. Jamie's eyes shone. He looked away. I became a paramedic because those deaths bothered me, he murmured. You went into transition because you thought you could make them cleaner. Now you tell me you're piping them somewhere. I didn't design the pipe. My voice dropped. I'm just standing too close to it. He scraped his chair back. I can't stop you, he said. He trusts you more on this. If you're wrong, I know. He left his coffee untouched. The London Central node sat under the theatre like roots. Officially, it was infrastructure, power feeds, generators, cooling banks. In truth, it anchored one of the Thanocline structures Doyle had described. Clearance had taken weeks of carefully framed audit requests. Once I had the maps, I'd spent too many nights walking those tunnels in my head. The node room was large and round. No windows. A waist-high metal ring encircled a central pit. Thick cables ran from its underside into the floor. In the pit, crooked black pillars rose like someone had poured steel and bone together and left it to freeze mid-flow. Fine strands stretched between them, trembling when the coil upstairs fired. This was the part of the Thanocline we could see. The rest sank into ground and out into the band overhead. Consoles around the ring showed field strength, transfer rates, alignments. Most staff treated it like a strange power plant. I treated it like a mouth. On the morning of my father's transition, I stood in that room with a wrench in my pocket and a patch file on a tablet. Sabotage had to be quiet. Anything dramatic would bring security running. Panic fed the nodes as well as disaster. If I simply broke the node, the underyield would bounce back elsewhere as a harder, sharper harvest. If I could throw sand into the gears instead, I might buy small reprieves and blur my father in the noise. The first step was physical. The pillars were wrapped with metallic coils. Each coil channeled outflow from the theatre coil into the Thanocline. Months of observation had shown that a few handled most of the load. I climbed down into the pit, while the room sat quiet. My access badge opened the rail. No one questioned me. I wore a technician's jacket and a tired expression. Up close, the pillars were worse. The black material had a grain like wood, but where a tree would have knots, these had half-formed faces. A cheek here, a jaw, the hint of an eye socket where the pattern twisted. I forced my gaze back to the coils. Each was bolted on at 4 points. The central pillar carried the thickest coil. I loosened the bolts half a turn, then another. Enough to hold under normal load, enough to slip when the hard harvest peaked. Back at the console, I plugged in the tablet. The patch file was ugly, stitched from my own limited understanding and borrowed code. It told the node's control software to lie about alignment for 1 cycle. When the coil slipped, the readings would still show nominal. For a short window, the system would think the mouth was chewing properly while its teeth slid. Back in the theatre, my father would be under the coil. I checked my watch, then rode the lift up. He looked small on the bed. I'd never thought of him that way. Even sick, Douglas carried himself with stubborn mass. In a hospital gown under the coil arm, chest hitching with the ventilator, he seemed folded in on himself. Jamie stood on the far side. "You're late," our father rasped through the mask. "I was double-checking equipment." I moved to the head of the bed. Auditor's habit. "That's my boy." His eyes creased. On the neighbouring bed, William Doyle lay under the second coil station. They kept him on site now, a living sensor. His frame had thinned, the prongs in his neck replaced by a permanent implant. His eyes tracked me. So it's family day. Apparently. His presence was deliberate. Keane had argued that having a previous reversal subject in the field during a hard harvest might help shape the flow, like hanging someone who already knew how to drown off the side of the boat. Clinicians moved through routines, checks, confirmations. The coil arms lowered. "You don't have to do this," Jamie murmured, leaning close to our father. "It's a bit late to get off." Dad managed a rough laugh. He touched Jamie's arm. "Let your brother do his job." Jamie's eyes met mine. I nodded once. The petals folded around our father's head and neck. Contacts clicked into bone. The other coil closed on Doyle. The implant at his neck glowed. I took my place at the console, where I could see both beds and the node readouts. "Transition coil ready," the lead clinician called. "Thanocline sensors aligned. Begin." The lights dipped. The low vibration of the field rose under my feet. On the node feed, the pillars stirred. Coils around them began to glow. My father's heart trace dipped as anesthetic and field took hold. The ventilator hissed. His brain line smoothed, then wobbled. Field at 70%. On the yield map, London brightened, threads tightening. Doyle sucked in a long breath, held it. "They feel you," he whispered. His heart rate jumped. The implant bulbs lit in sequence. Field at 80, approaching threshold. The alignment meter for the central coil edged toward the band I'd set. The patch sat ready. The moment came. Below, the loosened bolt slipped. The coil shifted. The real alignment swung out of true. On the console, the patched readings stayed calm. All channels within tolerance. The system believed its own lie. The node did not. A low rumble rolled up from the pit. The pillars shuddered. The half-faces in their grain seemed to twist. Strands between them brightened, but instead of streaming neatly upward, some flared outward, arcing against the ring. In the theatre, a deep buzz ran through the coil arms. Gel bulbs around my father's head flashed. His brain trace spiked, fell, leapt. "Field instability," the technician shouted. "Feedback from node. Shut it down." The lead clinician's hands flew. "Controls aren't responding. Node's misreporting. I can't get a clean drop." On the bed, my father's body jerked. His hands clenched, his eyes snapped open under the coil. For a heartbeat, they locked on mine. Behind them, just for that instant, I saw the corridor again. Flesh, metal, endless faces, a pressure like a hand tugging threads. He gasped, chest arching, then sagged. Doyle screamed. It was not a scream meant for human ears. It scraped up into frequencies that made my skin burn. His back arched, straining the metal. "Something's pulling." His voice tore. "They're trying to drag the whole node through." The monitors spasmed. Below, the central coil slipped fully free. Raw energy poured into the pit without a clear path. It hit pillars, rebounded, filled the room with searing blue-white glare. Emergency dampers tried and failed to engage. The patch had jammed their reading. Heat rolled through the floor. Overhead lights blew. Darkness dropped for a second before wall strips flickered on. Smoke hazed the air, not thick enough to choke, just enough to blur edges. "Power spike!" someone yelled. "We're over threshold!" On the console, the yield map glitched. London's node flickered between bright and dark. Outside, far away, another region flared hard. A coastal icon blinked red with a caption, "Unplanned structure failure, field compensation." My sabotage hadn't just made the mouth bite itself. I'd kicked its jaw. "Get him out from under there!" Jamie lunged for our father. The coil arm resisted, then lifted under manual override. The petals opened. My father's face was grey. His eyes stared at the ceiling. The ventilator alarm screamed. Jamie scrambled onto the bed, planting his palms on our father's chest and starting compressions. A nurse grabbed a bag valve mask. I grabbed the emergency release at the side of the coil and yanked the contacts from his neck. If the node was thrashing, I wasn't leaving him plugged in. Electricity snapped across my fingers. The implant at Doyle's neck spat sparks. His eyes rolled back as molten plastic sank into his skin. "Cut field to 0, the lead clinician shouted. "I'm trying. Everything's locked. Nodes feeding back." On the console, the patch's brief window ended. Real data slammed in. Every gauge bled red. The system recognized the misalignment. It did what our systems always did when something went very wrong. It shut down. The hum vanished. The lights steadied. In the pit, the coils went dark. The strands sagged. In the theater, the coil arms drooped like tired limbs. Jamie kept pressing. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on, old man." I watched the heart trace. Flat. "Time?" the lead clinician asked quietly. Jamie didn't stop. "Jamie!" I touched his arm. "He's gone." He shook me off and kept pressing. "He's under your miracle. Use it." "The coil's down," I answered. "The node's offline. If we try to push now, we just make him a flare." He glared at me, sweat shining on his forehead. "I don't care what's pulling," he snarled. "I want my father back." His hand slowed, stopped. A crash team swarmed in to take over the chest, but I turned away. On the neighboring bed, Doyle lay motionless. Smoke curled from the implant at his neck. His chest didn't move. His monitor stayed blank. The first reversal subject and my father had been broken together in the same surge. The aftermath turned to smear. Fire suppression crews in the node room, inspectors checking every coil and bolt. Keen staring at graphs that showed our spike and the compensating spike elsewhere. Investigations that circled the word sabotage without daring to land. They never found proof. The patch had corrupted when the field collapsed. Loose bolts could be maintenance failure. Officially, the London node suffered a hardware fault under stress, causing partial output interruption and a local accident. Unplanned deaths in another region were folded under that story. We issued statements about infrastructure and safety reviews. In private, Keane called me in. He looked older, a little more hollow around the eyes. "You nearly tore the node out of the ground." His voice was very calm. "I loosened some bolts. Your system did the rest." He paced to the window and back. "You killed William Doyle. You killed several staff. You killed your father." He was dying already. I forced the words out. "You saw his charts." "You chose the moment," he answered. "You put him under the coil when you'd tampered with the node." I tried to steal him out from between the teeth. My hands curled. He might have gone in that surge anyway. He might have died quietly in his chair. Keane leaned on the desk. Instead, he died in my theater, inside your sabotage. "You don't get to turn this into a simple parable," I snapped. "Not after years of arranged hard harvests." He exhaled through his nose. "I'm not your priest. I'm your director. My duty is to keep the machine from ripping us apart. Your little stunt didn't dent the war upstairs. It didn't free a single soul. It just made them tug harder somewhere else." "I know. That's what worries me." His gaze sharpened. "You know, and you did it anyway. That makes you either a liability I have to remove, or a man who'll act while fully aware of the cost." "Remove me then!" I almost laughed. "Feed me to your pillars. Use me as a bolt." He blinked, almost amused. "You think I do that? Throw dissenters straight into the node? You might as well. Save paperwork." "You give me too much credit for cruelty." He shook his head. "Killing you fixes nothing. It doesn't mend coils or calm the thanocline. It doesn't lower demand. It only removes one of the few people here who's both angry enough to act and informed enough to aim." I frowned. "You want me to stay?" "I want you to stop kicking random supports." His voice sharpened. "If you're going to harm the system, do it with finesse. Find places where shaving a little off won't trigger a harvest. Thin slices, leaks, where the war can't respond without burning more than it gains. You're asking me to be a saboteur under your supervision. I'm offering an arrangement." He slid a folded card across the desk. "You keep auditing. You flag opportunities where we can fix inefficiencies in ways that bleed energy sideways, into ground, into nothing, rather than straight up the line. You bring them to me. I don't look too closely at the details. And if I refuse? Then I inform certain people you were responsible for the node failure. His tone stayed mild. They won't jail you. They'll find a way to plug you into the machinery without wasting your years. You'll finally see the ship from the inside. Permanently. We stared at each other. You're blackmailing me into being your controlled insurgent. I'm giving you a way to channel your anger into something that might move the numbers by fractions. You can also walk away and pretend you never saw the map. It won't change how many people go into the walls. He let the card sit between us. For when you find a loose bolt that doesn't bring the house down. He didn't press for an answer. I walked. Corridors, viewing rooms, wards, the node access doors, past the canteen where technicians laughed too loudly, past the small chapel where Father Michael Renfrew knelt alone. He looked up as I passed. Our eyes met. Something in his expression said he knew, in his own way, that the building was wrong. I kept moving. At my father's flat, the chair was empty. His oxygen line lay coiled on the floor. His mug sat on the side table with dried coffee at the bottom. His tablet was dark. Jamie sat on the sofa, staring at nothing. "He's in the wall now," he murmured as I stepped in. I stopped. "What?" "He's part of whatever you plugged him into." His gaze slid to me. "You and your coil and your node. You fed him into the thing you won't name. I tried to pull him back. You tried to be clever." His voice sharpened. "You wanted to hurt the system and save him. You managed neither." I opened my mouth, closed it. He stood stiffly. "I'm going back to work." He brushed past. "Someone has to deal with the bodies you lot miscount." The door closed. The flat changed shape. I crossed to my father's chair and rested my hand on the worn arm. "I'm sorry," I said. The clock on the wall ticked. The building creaked. Nothing answered. I didn't take the promotion Keane had first offered me. On paper, I stepped sideways into a hybrid post. Auditor and consultant on yield efficiency and loss reduction. It looked like a demotion disguised as specialization, the sort of job where you could push someone after a public failure. In practice, it gave me access to more of the leaks. Some were obvious. Nodes with hairline cracks where energy bled into ground. Old city infrastructure where worn metal threw off more incidental death than the war upstairs cared about. Some were subtle. Protocols that pushed terminal patients into early transitions, bumping yield without improving care. Triage rules that treated certain crises too aggressively. With each, I had a choice. Fix it properly and the machine ran cleaner. Or fix it on paper while leaving it just misaligned enough that a little of the flow went sideways. I chose the second more often than not. Always small, a fraction of a percent shaved here, a slight dip there, never enough to flash red on the main map, enough to peel flakes off the giant's hoard. I also started sending messages, not broadcasts. I'd read the old files on leaks and uprisings. Public revelations created panic. Panic fed nodes. These were notes. An unsigned suggestion to a coil engineer in another city, pointing out a design tweak that, if corrected, would incidentally dump a sliver more of their field into the ground. A line buried in a dam maintenance report, recommending reinforcement that would quietly remove a likely collapse the hard harvest schedule had penciled in. A comment on a health policy draft, urging more chronic disease investment in a region tagged as expendable. I worded each as a dry professional recommendation. No mention of ships or wars. Some recommendations stuck. Some were cut by people higher up. On my own filtered version of the yield map, a handful of nodes I'd touched dimmed by barely perceptible degrees over months. Others held bright. When Keane and I spoke, we kept it brief. "You shaved 3% off Northern Corridor this quarter." He skimmed a report one day. I corrected an inefficiency. "You prevented a dam failure we were pivoting a hard harvest on. The engineers did their job." He watched me. "This is small work. I'm not looking for a grand gesture. I glanced at the map. I'm looking for cracks. Cracks make systems brittle, he warned. Brittle things shatter. Then we'll deal with the pieces when they fall. You're becoming quite the heretic. Heretics deal in visions. I tapped the graphs. I have data. At night, I sat by my father's bed. After the theatre, paramedics had managed to restart his heart. The return was incomplete. His brain had taken enough damage in the surge that he didn't speak and didn't wake. He breathed on his own, labouring. We'd moved him to a small care facility outside the city, a quiet place, no nodes nearby. His hand lay on the blanket, fingers curled. Sometimes I held it. Sometimes I watched my small personal map on the tablet in my lap. The nodes I'd tampered with glowed in a different colour. Here and there they dimmed a little more. Beyond them, the rest of the web burned. My father's name sat on a list at the side. Transitions suspended. No further coil. I'd pulled every string I could to keep him off any future trials. No more reversals, no more thanocline. Just a slow, ordinary fade. I'm trying, I would murmur. It's not enough, it won't ever be, but I'm trying. Once in a while, I felt the faintest squeeze of his fingers around mine. It could have been reflex. It could have been imagined. It didn't matter. Above us, a war bigger than my species raged in a layer we couldn't see. Ships built from bodies flung energy at enemies we'd never meet. The Ministry of Transition kept its careful accounts, adjusting valves to feed the engine just enough to keep it from tearing us apart faster. In the middle of that, one man with a tablet and a guilty conscience stole crumbs. It wasn't heroic. It wasn't clean. It didn't stop the procession of the dead. But in that small room, with my father's hand still warm in mine and a few dimmer nodes on the screen, it felt like a promise. As long as I could reach the bolts, I would keep looking for the ones just loose enough to turn.